Welcome back. In the first part of the lecture, we saw the derivation of the second law of thermodynamics that Jaynes came up with in 1965. I strongly recommend reading that paper of his in the American Journal of Physics. It's extremely pedagogical and it's a gem. One of the things that's absolutely crucial about understanding of the second law, namely you go from one situation of a thermal equilibrium to another, is that there are many questions that one could ask about it. One could ask the relaxation rates as you approach equilibrium. You could ask whether you approach equilibrium or not. You could ask for all the transport coefficients. There is plenty to be studied there. So it's very important to recognize what it is that Jaynes did and what it is that he did not. While it is true that he also contributed to non-equilibrium thermodynamics and non-equilibrium statistical mechanics, what we just saw in the first part of this lecture was the derivation of the second law. All the other questions are really important and deserves to be studied. We're not going to do that. But what is really crucial is to understand the conceptual sophistication and also the actual mathematical simplicity of his derivation, of Jaynes' derivation. On the subject of non-equilibrium, one of the things that is important to grasp is that theories of non-equilibrium are just, or rather, processes of non-equilibrium are just too many, and there are too many ways to be out of equilibrium. And so in order to come up with a model, you have to be particularly specific about what kind of non-equilibrium process you want to study. The slogan that I like in this respect is that you can conceivably come up with a theory of elephants, but it will be absolutely impossible to come up with a theory of non-elephants, because that would include everything that could possibly happen out there in the world. It just won't happen. Very good. What I would like to do in this next part of the lecture is to discuss some aspects of the second law, and I'll start by replaying whatever we did earlier concerning the second law, but now instead of using equations, I'm just going to use pictures. So this is the way it goes. We want to study the concept of reproducibility and how this, the reproducibility of experiments, and how this is connected to the second law. So imagine that you are in a region in phase space, whatever this is, that's phase space, and you are in a region, or you are in a situation of equilibrium. The original variables are some expected values at time t, and this leads to a distribution that is canonical at time t, and this is described by an entropy which happens to be the same as the Clausius entropy, and the region of space that is described by this probability distribution. Okay, well, the probability distribution just extends over the whole of phase space, but the typical states, the typical region, I'm going to just draw it like this, the typical region are T. These are the states, the microstates that have appreciable contribution to the calculation of all the expected values. States outside here either have very low probability. Remember, these probabilities decay exponentially, right? You have the Boltzmann factors. So states out here, like when you're out here in this region, are going to have very low probability. They don't contribute. States close to the region, to the origin here, they're going to have high probability, but they're far too few. Remember, this axis here have like 10 to the 23 dimensions. So the volume of the region that you have here is completely negligible compared to all the others out there. So that's a typical region, and this is going to evolve to a new situation of equilibrium. So here I'm going to draw the evolution. This a state here goes to a state there. Nothing particularly fancy there. And when this region evolves, it evolves to a region that has the same volume, but possibly a funny shape. Evolves to a region, let me see the notation I used here, to the region RT prime. Now, the amazing things about these regions here is that the region RT has a volume. The volume of that region is basically the exponential of the entropy at time t. Maybe I won't even write I won't even write C or G here. This is the Clausius entropy. There. And this evolves to this new region that has exactly the same, maybe I should write the CT there. This is the non-canonical distribution. It's going to have exactly the same volume that you were there. Now, when we maximize the entropy now, to have a description purely in terms of these expected values, so here we have the expected values are x of t. Here the values are going to be x of t prime. When we now go ahead and we maximize an entropy subject to these new expected values, we get a new region, right? Everybody inside here has x of t. Everybody inside of this star-shaped region also has x of t prime. But up here you also have x of t prime. So when you maximize entropy subject to the expected value, now you get a much bigger region, which is the new thermodynamic, involves the new thermodynamical entropy later. So the fact that this volume here is smaller than that volume there is a statement of the second law. St is less than St prime. The thermodynamic entropy of Clausius increases, is exactly the same as the volume of the typical region at time t, also increases to a new volume of the typical region later. It's the same statement. Now it's expressed in terms of the region of typical states. Roughly the probability is constant within this region and 0 outside. Same thing happens here. The probability is roughly constant and 0 outside. Now notice one of the things that's happening here. If you there are two ways to interpret this expression here, which, as I have just said, is equivalent to this one. The one way to interpret it is that, yes, entropy increased. It's a second law. But there is another way to think about this. that comes from looking at these volumes here. When you have an experiment, an experimental situation, and what you want to do is you want to control your experimental devices so as to produce a system with microstates within a certain region. You want to control the microstate of the system. The system is being controlled in the sense that if you control this x's, once you have control over those expected values, you are going to know that for certain the microstate of the system is going to be contained within this small region of volume e to the entropy. Any state so we have controlled by having these initial expected values, we have controlled the microstate of the system to be anywhere in here. When it evolves, this state will evolve to somewhere inside here. This one maybe to someone inside there. But for all of these guys, we're going to have the new values. If we were to because the new values actually extend to a larger region, whenever you manage to control your system to start inside here, what you find is that we land within this region, the typical region for those values. So in that sense, the experiment is reproducible. X, t always goes into x, t prime. You really do not end out there. You just end within the start region. This means that the experiment is reproducible. So the second law of thermodynamics is a manifestation of reproducibility of the experiments. So now we can do a couple of interesting things here, because you could say, how do we know that the choice of variables provides an adequate description? What constitutes an adequate description? If you're going to choose variables, what variables do you choose? That's exactly what we're doing when we say we have all of these variables x's. How many do you choose? Which do you choose? Well, imagine that you have chosen the wrong variables. If you choose the wrong variables, then one of the things that might happen is that let's see. Suppose that we didn't choose enough variables here, and so we have a situation where you have not controlled your microstate sufficiently. It may happen if you pick a state out there that you're going to end up out there, right? It might be that this situation here is not going to happen with overwhelming probability. So, for example, imagine that you have a description that you deem to be adequate. What does that mean? You have enough control over the initial microstates that you always end up with the same final macro states. These are the only things that you can actually measure. Suppose you were to add, suppose we added some extra variables y. What would happen then? Suppose that you have these are the initial x's. And suppose that I were to have information about additional y's. So this is, we fix the x's and we fix the y's. Now remember, you don't know how to fix the y's because you may not have control over them, but I'm asking the question, should we look for them? Should we try to control some more? Well, when this guy evolves, right, it is going to evolve into some wacky shape like that, and any state that's here is going to evolve there. Any state that happens to be here is going to evolve into some wacky shape over there. To the extent that we can only measure x, then if we can only measure x, then all of these states in the small region are going to be x's just as much as these states here were x's too. So if your experiment was already reproducible with the old choice of variables x, then adding additional variables is not going to simplify your problem, or is not going to produce anything that would be experimentally detectable. So if x, okay, let me write it in words like this. If this process was already reproducible, then including y makes no difference. Unless, of course, you manage to measure y as well. Then it's a different experiment, okay? Here's another one. Suppose that you have a description in terms of x's, and this evolves. These guys are going to evolve into some funny region. But you find that this guy evolves into some funny region, but then the distribution of xt primes is something funny like that. So that this distribution here is not quite this distribution here is not, it's an typical, it's not within the typical region. Under these circumstances, because this guy here could evolve over there, you see that the distribution that you had over there, or rather, the experiment is not reproducible, right? What that means is that in order to really have a reproducible experiment, you should have limited this with additional variables so that you would end up with a smaller region over there. So the amusing thing that comes through from this analysis of Jaynes of what happens when you consider the second law from the point of view of information and restriction of these volumes in phase space is that the concept of reproducibility is actually very helpful to understand experimentally what it is that's going on with the second law. Very good. Is there anything else I should comment here? Not yet. So what I would like to do next is to describe a second kind of comment, which has to do with reversibility and irreversibility. And then we'll discuss how these notions are connected with the arrow of time. The thing that I would like to mention here is that there is a fair amount of confusion in that when we talk about reversible processes and irreversible processes, there are several types of reversibility involved. So there is, on the one hand, what one may call mechanical or microscopic reversibility, which just means that you take positions, these are just positions, and you take them to same. You do time reversal really on these guys, and so if you take the momentum, you just flip this into minus the momentum. You flip all the velocities of the particles. Under these circumstances, if you have a particle, this is a particle as it evolves in time, and the particle has a certain trajectory, then flipping the velocities means that instead of having a particle here, consider this point here, instead of having a particle that has a velocity to the right, we're going to consider the particle with a velocity to the left, and so the trajectory does something like this. This flipping of the momentum of the particle. You say, first, most important, time is always going forward, right? I'm not reversing time, but this is called time reversal. It is not that you're reversing time. It's really that at some point you flip the velocities and make the trajectories proceed, right? It would be more accurately described as motion reversal. Anyway, if you reverse the velocities of the particles, you are going to retrace the trajectories. Just flip the trajectories. They were going in one direction, now they're going in the opposite direction. This retraces the trajectories. Retraces, well, that's not quite a good word. The trajectories there. The trajectories or the paths are followed in the opposite directions. So, but it's also crucial to realize that these are the micro states. Micro state trajectories are just fallen backwards. Very good. So this is what we talk about mechanical reversibility. There is also Carnot or thermodynamical. No, let's see. Yeah, let's call it's Carnot or macroscopic reversibility. Under these circumstances, so this is as opposed to just mechanics and microscopic, what is being retraced here is the trajectory of a macro state. Then the path of macro states, the macro state path is traversed in the opposite direction. The idea here is you go from one macro state of equilibrium to another, to another, to another, to another, and if you want, because this is happening so incredibly slowly, you could retrace your steps. This is the situation in which the change in entropy is actually zero. And there is no implication here that the actual molecules are going to be traversing their trajectories in the opposite directions, right? In the opposite direction. It just doesn't happen. So this is just for the macro states. There is yet another form of reversibility, which is called Planck or thermodynamic reversibility, which just says that you don't really need, to go from one equilibrium state to another through a path that is of equilibrium states. You don't need to follow all those equilibrium states. All you really care is if you started here, something happened, and you got there. Is it actually possible to make something happen and reobtain the original state? This is the same, or should perhaps more accurately be called recoverability. Can you recover the initial state? For many processes in thermodynamics, that's all you really need. We haven't really discussed any of these things, and we won't. For us, the crucial distinctions are between the crucial reversible paths are the Carnot reversibility and maybe also the reversibility of the laws of classical mechanics. So here is the first comment I would like to make about this. Whenever people say that the irreversibility of thermodynamics is in contradiction to the reversibility of the laws of mechanics, you can see that there is you have a problem in that statement, because the reversibility of the laws of mechanics refers to reversing the trajectories of microstates, while the reversibility of thermodynamics refers to reversing the macro state trajectories. So you're talking about two completely different concepts of reversibility. So the reversibility of mechanics has nothing to do, is not in conflict with the irreversibility of thermodynamics. And the reason is that you're talking about two different concepts of reversibility, microscopic and macroscopic. They're completely separate. There is no conflict between them. So whenever people talk about reconciling the reversibility of mechanics with the irreversibility of thermodynamics, you see that that's not at all necessary. As we saw in the second law, the reversibility of Hamiltonian mechanics was absolutely crucial to deriving the irreversibility of thermodynamics. The two are perfectly compatible with each other. So that's, again, Jaynes, 1965. Very good. Next topic. The arrow of time. Sometimes it is said that the irreversibility of thermodynamics, entropy tends to increase, is what establishes the arrow of time. But it's kind of interesting. How can you say that entropy increases without having had an arrow of time beforehand? So to say that entropy increases because to say that the increase of entropy establishes the arrow of time is something that would make the second law of thermodynamics into a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? It would be a tautology. So if the arrow of time is set by the second law, by the increase of entropy, then the second law is a tautology. Something that is true by virtue of its own definition. The typical example in logic books about what tautology is all bachelors are unmarried, to which you would say, duh, of course. The being unmarried is part of the definition of what being a bachelor is. In the same sense, if entropy increases with time is the second law, then claiming that the second law gives you the increase, the arrow of the direction of time passing, the arrow of time, is a tautology. It's part of what the second law is all about. So no, I don't think that this is a good idea. In order to have a second law that's meaningful, you need to have a notion of arrow of time that comes from elsewhere. A meaningful second law requires an independent notion of arrow of time. Let me discuss this a little bit from the point of view of reversibility. Suppose that you start, of reproducibility. Suppose that you start with a small region here in phase space defined by certain values of these quantities, and this region is the region of typical states at time t. Suppose you were to evolve this. So this evolves into some form of star-shaped region that has exactly the same volume. But if you want to figure out the region that has the same, the typical region for those expected values, so that here you have the same expected values inside as outside, so the typical region is much bigger, entropy increased. So now let's ask the question. Suppose that you prepared your system in this small region. Where did it come from? Well, if you prepared your system within this small region, it necessarily must have come from here. But this is where the notion of reproducibility and having been able to control the microstates comes into play. It is not possible to describe, to prepare, to control your system to be inside here. If you only control the x's, what you will find is that in a thermodynamical description in which you have control over the x's, your microstate is confined to being in this larger region. If you ask then, if I only know that I'm in this larger region, where did I come from? You're going to realize that you evolve this region here backwards, and you're going to end up with a region, I didn't do this right. I want to have a region that's spiky, star-shaped, but of the same volume, this has a certain volume, this guy here at t, but I evolved it back, right? So this is a prime, this is a prime. This has the same volume as the one up as this guy here. So if we want to figure out where these guys came from, you're going to end up with a region that's much, much bigger. It's going to be this whole region. It's going to be the same size here, but bigger than the original one. And if you now further figure out what is the typical region that corresponds to these states that are there, let's call them x primes at t, the typical region is going to be even bigger. You have to maximize the entropy. So this is going to be the super duper null region, double prime at t. So you can see the following. Look at the conclusions that I'm going to draw from here. If you start in this little region here, you evolve there. The expected values are xt primes. So the typical region for xt prime is bigger. So we conclude that in going from here, from x's to xt primes, entropy increased. But if now you just consider this region here and you say, where could that have come from? And you propagate it back in time, well, you get a region that's much, much bigger. It's not this one. You get a region that's much, much bigger. And you conclude that not only entropy increased as you went towards the future, but entropy increased as you went towards the past as well. So what this is telling you once again is that entropy increases towards the future. But if you apply exactly the same rules that you were going to go to the future, remember the laws of mechanics are reversible, right? If you apply exactly the same dynamics rules as you go to the future, as you come from the future towards the past, entropy increases towards the past too. So this is the kind of thing that tells you you have to be very careful about what are the actual descriptions that you're using to describe your system. Let me give you another example of this that you may find amusing. As you go towards the future, entropy increases. Okay, very good. And these, of course, are all equilibrium states. Okay. Now, one of the things that happens when you're doing statistical mechanics is that eventually you reach a state of equilibrium. Suppose that you reach a state of equilibrium. You can have fluctuations. So now the question that I'm going to ask is, suppose you reach a state of equilibrium, is it possible to have very large fluctuations? And the answer is yes, you can have very large fluctuations, but the fluctuations, those fluctuations are going to be very rare, and you're going to have to wait a whole long time in order to get a large fluctuation. Large fluctuations will require a long time. Very good. So now at this point you start seeing that there is we have here the asymmetry between a mechanical description and the thermodynamical description. There may be an asymmetry in time here, because if you have a glass of water with a chunk of ice and you allow it to reach equilibrium, so here is the glass of water with a chunk of ice. This reaches equilibrium. And it takes a certain amount of time. Very good. On the other hand, you could actually say, if this is in equilibrium, I could allow this to evolve further, and after a long while, it may actually, you could have a huge fluctuation, and you can reach the same state as you had before. Now, when you look at a scheme such as this, you say, what is the asymmetry here? There is no asymmetry, you would say. But isn't it true that in order to get ice and water to equilibrium, it may take a few minutes, half an hour? But if you're just going to have water and you have to wait so that this spontaneously becomes ice and water, you might have to wait here several times the age of the universe. So this is not going to happen anytime soon. So it appears that the difference between, or the asymmetry that you see here, is an asymmetry in the time scales for the two phenomena to happen, right? And indeed that is true. And so where is the asymmetry produced in this kind of scheme? Well, the asymmetry really is introduced in the preparation conditions. This is something you can prepare so that this naturally by itself and spontaneously evolves here. But if you prepare this, if you prepare your system in this state, there is no way that by accident you could have landed with a microstate in that smaller region that would allow you to go here. If you prepare the state, your system in this larger region, most of the time you're going to be outside, and you're going to evolve to situations outside here and not inside there. So if you have a glass of wine, sorry, it's that time of the day. If you have your water in equilibrium and you leave the room and you come back and you see that you have ice and water, what do you conclude? Well, you conclude that your model was wrong. You thought that the model was you allow the water to evolve spontaneously to the ice and water. That's extremely unlikely. It is much, much more likely that somebody came into the room and placed a glass of water with ice there. So whenever you find situations that are very, very unlikely, the safe bet is to say you have the wrong model. These things did not just evolve spontaneously. There were all the variables in the picture. Somebody brought it to your room. Very good. One of the things that we're going to be seeing later in the semester, but I will mention it very, very quickly now, is the fact that, let's go back to what we were doing here. If the arrow of time is set by the increase of entropy, then the second law is a tautology. A meaningful second law requires an independent notion of an arrow of time. Later in the semester, we're going to figure out how an arrow of time appears whenever you discuss a dynamics that's itself derived from entropy considerations. So when we study quantum mechanics, we are going to see that there is a natural arrow of time in quantum mechanics. But that's for later. See you next time.